Okay, so we're back and talking about where is the immune system. This is part 2 of a series of lectures I'm going to talk through just to help me study and hopefully maybe help someone else. Although I'm not intending to help someone else, it's just for my own personal profit. Talking about things makes you learn much more quicker, so I believe. So we're looking at where is the immune system. The immune system, as we know, has been integrated with other systems that I've already discussed in the earlier video. So we'll just move on from here to the anatomy of the immune system. So those physical and chemical barriers. Now we have the epithelial cells of skin, gut, and respiratory tract. And when we say epithelial, I actually don't know how to say that, but it's actually just the outside, pretty much the first layer of defense, as we say. So our stomach would be a first layer of defense, as it is connected to the outside. If you were to like put all your insides out, your stomach would be on the outside. It's kind of like a first layer. There's no skin to cover it, so pretty much, yeah. And you have acid in your stomach that stops bacteria from entering to your insides. So we know that. We know there's secretions between wax, tears, sweat, glands that comes from what we said was the endocrine system. I do believe that was the case. We have mucus in the nose, trachea, gut, urine, proteolytic enzymes, which are like enzymes that break down, what's it called? I'll look that up. Just give me a sec. Proteolytic enzymes are a group of enzymes that break down the long chain-like molecules of proteins, which we know as peptides, if you've learnt some biology. The cells of the molecules in the immune system access most organ systems in the body, traveling via blood vessels and lymphatic vessels. Whatever. We don't need to know that. Anatomy of the immune system. So, immune cells originate from our bone marrow. Isn't that surprising? And I'll go into that a bit more. The central sites we have are lymphoid tissues, the lymph nodes that I talked about earlier. So the primary lymphoid organs are the bone marrow and thymus. Thymus is like a butterfly-shaped organ that's located near your neck, near your hypothalamus maybe. I actually don't know. Better check on that. Secondary lymphoid organs are known as spleen and lymph nodes, as we said, mucosal and cutaneous associated lymphoid tissues. Peripheral sites, so all other tissues and systems, such as our skin, as I said, our guts, our heart, our brain, yeah, they're part of the immune system. So, when I was talking about the bone marrow earlier, we have this cell called the myeloid progenitor, and that is like a cell that belongs to passive, I guess. They don't actively seek out to destroy bacteria. Examples of these would be the erythrocytes, which are red blood cells. I can't ever say that. Platelets, basophils, eosinophils, neutrophils. Neutrophils are, what are they again? I do remember learning neutrophils. Also, these are lectures that I am learning currently and not, making stuff up. I'm just saying what I've learned. So if they're wrong, feel free to correct me. I'm happy to listen, and it will help me study. So neutrophil is a white blood cell that has enzymes. Yes, that's right, and that help destroy organisms that have been engulfed by phagocytosis. Yeah, they just break down the what do you call it? Peptides. And the myeloid progenitor originates from a self-renewing hematopoietic stem cell, which is a stem cell that turns into two other cells, which we've already learned, the myeloid progenitor and the lymphoid progenitor. And the lymphoid progenitor is the main thing we look at, which makes the B cells, the T cells, and the natural killer cells. So we'll just move on. The immune cells. We have mast cells. And the primary features and functions of mast cells as they enter tissues as immature mast cell progenitors where they mature. So the mast cells reside on pretty much near anywhere that's near outside. So near your skin usually, your skin, your lungs, your guts. They have a long life and they secrete or degranulate cytokines, and cytokines are like little blah 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 soluble mediators. They're like peptide chains that let other cells around them know that it's been damaged or something's going on, where you need to go and check what's going on next to me right now. So when you have like a cut, these mast cells would send out histamines or send out cytokines, and let your body know that you've been injured there, and then all your white cells will start flooding in. Okay, so what are cytokines? I explained it, but they're soluble proteins released from cells from preformed stores or from gene activation, transcription, translation, secretion, blah blah blah. Cytokine release is tightly coordinated and regulated, and it only affects cells that express specific cytokine receptors. So not all cells can recognize cytokines. These can target cell growth, differentiation, and mobility. Differentiation, we say, is in the sense when your white cells start to split into multiple cells. Alright, so I've talked about that. They also secrete histamine, yes, and other inflammatory mediators. Now histamine is a bit like an inflammatory response when your body gets damaged from the outside. So if you get cut, your things will start to swell, and those are your capillaries reacting from the mast cells sending out cytokines and histamines. And the histamine will actually make your capillaries swell up largely, and by swelling up, your white cells can come through the capillaries and target the place of cut that you've been cut. Okay, so recent evidence also says that mast cells may regulate and suppress the immune response. That's interesting. And antibacterial functions of these mast cells. So histamine and cytokines just let your passive cells, which I said earlier were the myeloid progenitors, come into play. So they don't actively search and kill foreign invaders, but they will assist in it. Alright, so the next cell that we need to know is neutrophils. So they come from the myeloid progenitors that we talked about from the bone marrow, and the bone marrow has that bone marrow progenitor, which I've forgotten the name, but you can always check up on that. And the primary features and functions for these neutrophils is the most common leukocytes, and we say leukocytes as in white blood cells. So they're not normally found in tissues. They only infiltrate inflamed peripheral sites, so they come around when you get damaged or when you get inflamed. They have antibacterial functions, and they also undergo phagocytosis, which is phago, which means eating, and cytosis is killing, so something like that. They kill invaders, I guess. They secrete cytokines, which promotes more inflammation, and promotes phagocytosis by macrophages. Macrophages are cells that just naturally just eat invaders, and they will actually send out cytokines, and the cytokines will tag each invader for these macrophages to come along and eat. So the next slide has nothing to do with what I need to talk about. Monocytes and macrophages, which I talked about earlier, they're derived from common myeloid progenitors in bone marrow, passive. I actually don't know if we use passive, but I'm just going to say this for now. There's like either passive or active cells, I guess, reactions to infections. Primary features and functions. Monocytes in blood migrate to inflamed tissues to become macrophages. Yes, monocytes just come to inflamed tissues. Macrophages can be found in cells and tissues. They just come out and start eating shit. So macro means big and phage means eater, big eater. Or phagocytosis, or eater, and cytosis is cells, so eater of cells. Anyway, they secrete cytokines, and they're very long-lived. Macrophages can also talk to lymphocytes. I don't know what that does essentially, but so your macrophages can talk to your white blood cells. So we're going to talk about B and T lymphocytes, white blood cells, and B lymphocytes were found in the bursa of Fabricius. We don't need to know that. We can just look at B lymphocytes as bone marrow lymphocytes, and T lymphocytes as thymus lymphocytes, because T cells come, well, B lymphocytes, they go to the thymus and then they mature into T cells. So the two main T cells, the helper T cells, TH, denoted by TH, helper T cells, and cytotoxic, cyto meaning cell and toxic meaning toxic, so they kill cells, T lymphocytes. So normal T cells and natural killer cells, we call them cytotoxic cells as natural killer cells. So B lymphocytes, they're derived from lymphoid progenitors in bone marrow. As we've said, they undergo maturation in bone marrow, part of the humoral immune response. So we've got two immune responses mainly for white blood cells, and B lymphocytes undergo humoral immune response. I forget what that means exactly, but we'll get to that later. The main function is to secrete antibodies. Right, the humoral immune response secretes cytokines which tag, like I said earlier. Antibodies are proteins that bind to extracellular antigens. So, as I said, the cytokines or antibodies, they're proteins that come to these invaders and they latch on. And we call no, that's not it yet. We don't go to that. So yeah, they just latch on and they just let other cells know that this is a bad guy. We'll deal with that more later. What are antigens? Now, antigens are different from antibodies, right? And antigens are substances that induce an immune response. Now, such antigens are called immunogenic. We say antibodies are not the same thing. They're proteins that just bind to antigens. So the cells have little, I guess, opening ports for these things to stick on, and antibodies come on, and usually antibodies let cells know, oh, I'm a good guy or I'm a bad guy, and some will latch onto the bad guys and say, hey, wait, this is not a normal cell, this is a bad guy. So they'll start emitting shit and letting your body know that that's not a good guy. So the types of antigens we have, curiously enough, are proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and chemical haptens. I don't know what chemical haptens are. I will look it up right now. I don't believe that is important to know, but let's just see. Okay, there's no actual normal definition for haptens. Alright, hapten is a small molecule that can elicit an immune response when attached to a large carrier such as protein. Okay. Chemical haptens. Antigen-specific receptors on lymphocytes bind small parts of these molecules, blah blah blah. Excuse me. Alright, one more thing. These antigens, they are receptors, and the cytokines or whatever emitted by lymphocytes will bind molecules to these antigen receptors, and these antigen receptors are also known as epitopes. Just remember that, it's a very important word, epitopes. Alright, so T lymphocytes, derived from the common lymphoid progenitors in bone marrow. They migrate to the thymus where they undergo maturation. Pretty standard stuff. They form part of the cell-mediated immune response, CMI response. So cell-mediated, so the cell actively goes and does stuff. The B cells undergo the humoral response, and that is a process of sending out antibodies to these cells to let helper T cells, as we've said, find them. And so the cell-mediated immune response will have a definition somewhere. I will look it up later. Let's just finish the rest of this. Okay, so the CD4 T cells, we call CD4 T cells as the helper T cells, because the CD4 recognizes a specific part of a cell which we call the MCH2 and the MCH1. So some cells in general will let other cells know what kind of cell they are. They will have this little thing on them called the MCH1 cell. Most cells that are part of your body will have it, and the T cells, the killer T cells, will go and seek these out when they find the cells. The helper T cells, the CD4 T cells, will find it on specific other cells, and I'll get to that later. I don't know what cells they go particularly onto, but I'll clarify that later. So helper T cells, characterized by the surface expression of the CD4 molecule. They help other cells of the immune response. There we go. So the immune cells have these CD4 reactive points on their bodies, and the helper T cells come onto them and tell them, hey, you, wake up, we need to go fight some bad guys. And that's what the CD4 T cells is for. Just letting other cells know that, you know, there's something going around here and we need to deal with it right now. Some CD4 T cells can suppress and regulate the immune response rather than activate the immune response. More on that later. So yeah, I've talked about CD8 T cells already, but they're also known as cytotoxic lymphocytes. They get help from the CD4 T cells, and we know what cyto means. It's cell and toxic killing. So they target cells in a specific way. They play a role in bacterial infections and viral infections and all that kind of stuff. So now we know. Right now we have the white blood cells, and they have two responses. They have the humoral response and the active cell-mediated response. We also know that from the bone marrow we have a hematopoietic stem cell that splits into two other cells called the myeloid progenitor and the lymphoid progenitor. The myeloid progenitor makes common cells such as erythrocytes, blood cells, platelets, basophils, neutrophils, monocytes. Those are the innate immune system. They don't actively seek to kill things, they're just there to help. The adaptive immune system is the B cells, the T cells, the natural killer cells, and that's the adaptive immune system because each cell, I don't think I've mentioned before, but each B cell, each T cell has specific binding reacting cell for each specific combination of cell combination, I guess. It just reacts to a substance. You know how each year we have a different strain of the cold? Well, there are so many different strains that our body actually makes B cells and T cells with so many possibilities of those cells actually having that certain MCH2 reactor thing. So we have so many cells. It's really amazing how the body works. I really love immunology. So let's go on a recap. The lecture summary and the things you need to know. So the coordinated and tightly controlled reaction of the immune system is called the immune response. And if you need to understand the immune system, you need to know what those key cells are. What are the key molecules? So the key cells we know are the innate immune cells, which include the mast cells, the neutrophils, and the macrophages. Pretty standard stuff, innate. They help with our active, the adaptive immune cell response, which are the T cells, the cytotoxic T cells, the helper cells, and the B cells. The key molecules that our body uses are antigens and antibodies and cytokines. Antigens are the parts on the cell that connect and stuff. Oh god, sorry, I've got a bad cough. I've got to finish this up. So the innate and adaptive immune responses are different, but they'll interact, and we'll explore that in lecture 2. So thanks for listening. If you're just watching this for fun, thanks for watching. But yeah, I will try and continue to do this for each of my lectures and probably make this a really interesting learning experience.